All right. Good morning, everyone. I hope all of you have your coffees and teas ready and are excited about the upcoming conversation. I'm very happy to see so many students here today. Thank you all for taking the time to join us virtually. Yeah, welcome to Democratic Diplomacy, an event brought to you by the German American Center, us here in Stuttgart, in cooperation with our friends at the Landeszentrale für politische Bildung Baden-Württemberg. My name is Marion Danzeisen and I'll be your host today. This conversation is the final event in our three-part series called What About Democracy? Some of you may have already joined last night's super interesting conversation about the question of whether or not democracy is in danger. And today we have invited 3 diplomats to talk to you and with you about why diplomacy is such an important part of democratic processes and how diplomacy works in countries without what we see as basic democratic structures and so on. So our guests will share personal experiences with you. And since we can't have all of you together in one actual room, we really would like to encourage you to join the conversation with your questions. Please use the Q&A function to do so. And you can ask your questions in German as well if you feel more comfortable, even though this is an English conversation. And with that, I already want to hand it over to our fabulous moderator, Andy Hayles, who is joining us from the US Consulate General in Frankfurt, where he currently works as a public affairs officer. Andy, thank you so much for being here with us. I'll let you introduce the panel and leave the rest to you guys. So thanks everyone and have a great conversation.
Well, thank you, Marianne, and thank you to the DAZ Stuttgart, and thank you to all of our partners in Baden-Württemberg. I want to congratulate the DAZ Stuttgart for the work that you all do with all 12 of the German American institutes all over Germany. What you all do to strengthen the ties between Germany and the United States, and more importantly, between Germans and Americans, is of critical importance. This What About Democracy series does just that. I know that our audience is a majority of students, and that makes me very excited because talking to young people is the most important work that we get to do as diplomats. So thank you so much to all of the students out there that are joining us today. And because you all are so important, we have 2 incredible panelists. We have Peter Adams from the Foreign Office in Berlin and Carl McNamara from the US Embassy in Berlin. Peter Adams works for the Foreign Office in Berlin as a desk officer for Transatlantic Relations. He is a lawyer by training and has been working for the German diplomatic service since 2006. He has served in Damascus and in Dublin. And he has also worked in the Foreign Office's legal department and the Nuclear Disarmament Office and the Transatlantic Relations Office. And he's also married with 4 children. So this is another question you can ask about how we manage our life as foreign service officers with families. And Carl, a colleague of mine, is part of the US Mission Germany team. He's in the political section at the embassy in Berlin, focusing on German foreign policy with East Europe. He's previously served in Moscow, Yerevan, and a foreign policy advisor to European Command in Stuttgart. So he's almost like coming back home, Carl. He has also worked for the Office of Russian Affairs and for the Assistant Secretary in South and Central Asia in Washington, D.C. He's from Minnesota, and he spent his childhood in Almaty, Kazakhstan. So without further ado, let's jump into an introductory question. And the first question I have for you and Peter, and for Carl and Peter, I'll let you answer this one first, is we've all worked in difficult environments. Can you describe one assignment where the democratic values of that nation varied greatly from Germany?
Yeah, thank you very much, Andy. Thank you very much to everybody here, especially to our audience. I know from my own university experience that 10 o'clock on Friday morning is not a given. Thanks a lot. Yeah, well, as you said, Andy, my first posting abroad took me to Damascus in Syria. That was in 2008. as you will know, Syria was quite different. That was before the terrible civil war. I went there with my wife and our eldest daughter, and our eldest son was born during that time. In 2008, Syria was a stable dictatorship. It was ruled by the Assad family. In theory, you had provisions on free elections and freedom of opinion in the constitution, but in practice there were no free elections, no free media. Society was controlled by paramount secret services, and everybody was living in constant fear that they could be arrested at any time and disappear into prison. So that's, obviously that's an example of living in a country where the local values did not reflect our own ideas on freedom and democracy.
Now, Carl, over to you.
Thanks very much, Andy. And again, kind of echoing what's been said so far, thanks to everyone for participating. This is honestly one of the favorite parts for me of this job is engaging with folks in various countries, particularly students, just to hear the wide range of opinions. Normally these take place in person, which is allows for a more of a back and forth discussion, which is fantastic. But this, with the circumstances are what they are, this is we'll have to make this do. So looking forward to hearing some questions from you. So I guess I worked in Russia. I worked there in Moscow, in our embassy in Moscow, from 2014 to 16, and so that was shortly after the illegal annexation of Crimea. And I think it's safe to say that the understanding, or the democratic processes as they are in Russia are very different from what we have in the United States and from a lot of in the Western world, and from the alliance of democratic countries, if you want to put it like that. I think particularly now we're seeing an increased crackdown on one of the most important parts of the democratic process, and that's civil society. And the ability of organizations, of journalists to voice different opinions, to engage with a diverse grouping of people and organizations, and I think that is very different, and I think that's pretty clear to most people that follow Russian affairs. I think a pretty clear example of this is the ongoing list they have of undesirable organizations, which are basically undesirable organizations and foreign agents, which are deemed by the Russian government to either be funded partially or fully by foreign governments. Or undesirable entities, as we see, just a few days ago with Navalny's organization, with a lot of the leadership of his organization being cited as terrorists and extremists, and this essentially bars them from operating in the Russian Federation, but also, it also bars people from having association with these organizations, which really it hamstrings political discourse, public discourse, and civil society. So there's a lot of other issues you can go into on this. With when it comes to free and fair elections, the United States government also has concerns about free and fair elections that take place in Russia, and basically the lack of opposition, as again shown most extremely by the case of Navalny. But I'll go ahead and stop there, and happy to talk about it further pending your question.
Great. I wanted to go to my next question. Before I do that, I wanted to remind the audience that feel free in the chat function to submit your questions. We have a few prepared questions, but we really want to hear from you as the students about what you're interested in learning about and how German diplomats and American diplomats advance democracy around the world through their efforts, and how we sometimes do that as partners. The one question I want to ask to Peter and Carl is, the US and Germany are both very, very diverse countries, and we view diversity as a strength, and sometimes in certain countries that is not seen as a strength. This panel does not represent the diversity in both of our countries, But so I want to ask you all, how are your foreign services really addressing that question? How are your foreign services, your diplomatic corps, trying to increase the diversity of this important representation of our countries to show that diversity is a strength and it should be represented in the diplomatic corps? Carl, I'm going to go to you first with that question.
Sure. This is particularly under the Biden administration in the last few years. This is a white hot topic in the Department of State right now, and there is a lot of resources being put into this. Having said that, are we done? Is this a success? I mean, it's a success, but are we done? No, this is still a work in progress, and in my opinion, it will always be a work in progress. This is never, in my opinion, going to be something that we can just check the box on and say, okay, we're done. We can move on and focus on something else. This is going to be an ongoing issue. And I think, one of the things that the department is focused on is making sure that our Department of State, who represent, the foreign service officers and the employees that represent the U.S. people overseas, are reflective of our demographic, composition in the United States. So again, our demographic composition is always going to be changing. So the composition of our foreign service will always have to be changing. So I think right now there's an ongoing effort to really look at recruitment and outreach to communities that have not traditionally been had outreach targeted at these particular communities. Again, this is we're a bureaucratic organization. We will undoubtedly have a bureaucratic solution to this, which is not going to be perfect and by any sense of the imagination. But it is certainly progress, and it is certainly moving in the right direction. And not only outreach, recruitment outside of the department, but within the department as well. There is a focus on diversity. So, for example, we have different regional bureaus within the Department of State. We have South Central Asia, which covers obviously parts of Asia and Central Asia. And so Germany falls into the European Bureau. And so within the European Bureau, I don't want to get too much into the bureaucratic machinations and put you all to sleep, but basically every year there's a big machination of people that are looking at jobs within the Bureau. And so even within that internal process, there has been a big revamp into looking at how we can get more diversity in our positions in our embassies overseas and domestically. And I think it's also kind of important to emphasize that, I think correctly that we're not looking at diversity just in terms of, ethnic background, but also a diversity in terms of backgrounds, in terms of, diversity of thought and diversity of opinion. So I think, we're going into this with the right thoughts, with the right definition of what we're looking at in diversity. Obviously, it's a bureaucratic process, as I mentioned, so there's going to be some left to desired, and it's going to take time. That's the other thing. It's not going to be immediate because just by virtue of being a government organization, we're going to move a little bit slow. But I think we're moving very much in the right direction.
Great. And now over to Peter.
Yeah, thanks, Carl. There's not much I can add. I mean, we are in a very, very similar situation. Germany is getting more and more diverse, and of course, the foreign service wants to reflect that. And there is as you said, there is a delay between changes in society and then the public, the civil service and the diplomatic service adapting and reflecting that change. So the German Foreign Office, we're also very keen on recruiting as people from as many different backgrounds as possible, for two reasons. One of them is, of course, we want to, if we want to represent a diverse country abroad, then we need to be diverse ourselves. The other reason is, of course, that people, especially people who come from migrant backgrounds, for example, they bring in language skills, they bring in cultural sensitivity, so they bring in a lot of skills and ideas that we can use in our everyday work. So yeah, it is a field we are working on. We are making progress, but as Carl said, for the US colleagues, we still have a long way to go. So everybody in the audience who might bring some more diversity into our diplomatic service feel particularly welcome, and listen carefully when later on we might talk about how to apply for the diplomatic service.
Peter and Carl, I'm really happy that you answered those questions that way, and that it was a call to apply, because I think one of the key factors is having more and more people apply to become diplomats for both countries. And that really will help us increase the diversity in our diplomatic corps, and also finding ways to get the word out to all Germans and all Americans that they're welcome to join and represent their countries, I think is very important. And we have a lot of questions from from participants. The first question is, do you get cultural sensitivity training for every country you're stationed as a diplomat? And if so, what does it look like? Let's go to Peter for this one.
It's good I get the question first, because my understanding is that that training and preparation for postings is working much better in the US service than it does in our service. So in theory, we are meant to get intensive preparation before we go abroad. The idea is that we get language training, and that we also get an introduction into the culture of the country we are heading to. Sometimes that works, and sometimes it doesn't, because we are constantly short of staff. So when I went to Syria, to be honest, I got a 2-week training in Arabic, which I hadn't learned before, and that was more or less it. When I went there, my plan was to learn Arabic and get the culture on the job. That was my first posting, so I have to admit I had to learn that when you go to a foreign country as a diplomat, learning is not as easy as it was when I was a student going abroad, where you would kind of automatically pick up language and have easy access to people. So we do get some training, but it's not always as good as we would like it to be.
And now, Carl?
So we actually get a good amount. I don't know if we would call it necessarily cultural sensitivity training, but we do get a good amount of training. Depending on each job that you apply for has a different amount of training that is sometimes attached to it, whether you need the language or not. There are some jobs where they don't, require you to learn the language going out to a position. But we have what's called the Foreign Service Institute, which is basically an entire institute in Washington, D.C., where we go for our training, to include the usual course of a language outside of Arabic, Chinese, and Russian, and the particularly hard one is about 8 to 9 months. So before coming out here, I had about 8 months of German. Unfortunately, that was because of the pandemic, that was on Zoom. So I have what I affectionately refer to as my Zoom Deutsch, which is nicht perfect, but it gets me by. But in normal circumstances, it's an entire, almost really kind of university campus where we go, and it's our full-time job to learn the language, usually for about 8 to 9 months. And on top of that, there are other training, what we call them area studies, where we study the area that, which I think is probably the closest to what you were referring to as sensitivity training or cultural sensitivity training, where we learn about the country we're going to, we learn about the culture, the history, and everything really. And the language instructors are actually native speakers of the language that you're learning. So really kind of every day you're getting some kind of cultural training from them, because they're not shy about imparting knowledge about their culture, and they're usually quite proud about it, which is great. So yeah, we get a good amount of training, and there's a lot of training opportunities.
Great. Now the questions are really coming in now. So we have another one that says, how can diplomacy make states more democratic? So how do we as diplomats help states become more democratic? Let's go to Peter first.
That's a difficult one. I mean, our main contribution to democracy is our example. I mean, we live in a globalized world, and people all over the world there's a big public that can follow how we make decisions and also what we do. So setting an example, I think, is one important contribution to democracy. When we are posted in countries abroad, of course we promote our own culture and our own values. But there are, of course, certain limits. When I was posted in Damascus, for example, one of my jobs was to deal in cultural affairs. So one example was we did an exhibition on at the German Cultural Center on the peaceful revolution in '89. Of course, in countries like Syria, every exhibition you do has to go past a censorship process, so the Syrian authorities would have to approve. So what we did there was we relabeled the exhibition. We called it German-Polish relations from '89 to '90. We focused on the role of Solidarność in the peaceful revolution, and we were lucky the Syrian censorship didn't take that up. So when you are posted in non-democratic countries, there are certain free spaces that you can use to promote democracy. But of course, you have to be careful.
So, Carl, same question for you. You worked in Moscow, so I think that was a little bit of a difficult environment for this. So, how did you do this in Moscow?
Kind of echoing what Peter said. It is certainly a very important part. Diplomacy can play a very important part of fostering democracy overseas. But as Peter mentioned, you have to do it deliberately and you have to do it carefully, particularly in places like Syria, in particular in places like Moscow or Russia, just writ large. One of some of the ways that there are ways that the embassy, that foreign governments, to include the government of Germany, to include the United States government, engage with civil society, and they can act in supporting fashion. So you see a lot of these NGOs. Non-governmental organizations, that development organizations that are working overseas hand in hand with the Auswärtiges Amt, with the Department of State, to work with journalists, to work with civil society organizations, to work with any type of organizations from from journalism to helping train prison guards, properly, to police, to fighting corruption in police and security structures, all of these sort of things. And so, diplomats working hand in hand with foreign governments to help, I guess, foster transparency and democracy in a lot of these processes. And fighting corruption is one of the big, underpinning themes that a lot of diplomacy and a lot of development work that's supported by governments a lot are focused on. But again, as we see in particularly recently in Russia, organizations that work with foreign governments have to be very careful about how they interact with these organizations.
So we've just got a really insightful question from one of our participants that said, have you ever had a situation where you felt completely overwhelmed and thought that the situation you were in was not the situation you wanted to be in? And so I'm going to hand this over to Carl to answer first. But yeah, I think what the point is like, have you ever just felt overwhelmed and didn't know where to start with a solution? So go ahead, Carl.
Well, yes, definitely. I'd say almost regularly. The one that jumps to mind is when I was in this Armenian jail. I was in an Armenian prison at the time. I was working in the embassy in Yerevan, and we have. I was part of our American Citizen Services division, which basically a routine part of which is going out to visit American citizens that are in prison. And so I was in a not so pleasant Armenian jail, waiting for the American citizen to be let in. And it turns out that many of the guards in said prison were, in fact, the guy that was in this little room with me waiting was someone that I had refused for a visa recently. So it was not, an entirely pleasant situation. But I mean, you will, if you choose this type of job, you will definitely be taken outside of your comfort zone. And it's something that eventually you learn to kind of embrace. And it's something that actually you start to, well, enjoy might be not the right word, but it is certainly a part of the job, and it takes a certain type of person, I think, to really kind of get used to that. And as Andy mentioned, not only being outside of your comfort zone, but working effectively outside of your comfort zone and being able to find solutions, to problems that might not have, easy solutions or, solutions that are obvious. But at the same time, I find that to be one of the most fascinating parts of this work is the challenges that we're presented with on a daily basis, really.
And now, Peter, over to you.
Thanks. Yes, well, I had quite similar experiences to what Carl just talked about when I was in Damascus. I was also heading the legal team there, and as Carl said, it's part of an embassy's job to look after nationals who are in legal difficulties. Sometimes people tend to forget that when they travel abroad, when they go abroad, they go into a different legal system. And if you are in a place like Syria, that means that if the embassy is trying to help you, we have to do so within the framework of the local law, which is very different from what we have. I remember visiting a German national in a Syrian prison and talking to him, and it was kind of it was insofar a ritual as we would ask, "Are you treated all right? Are things fine with you?" And he would have to answer those questions with a prison official standing next to him. So it used to be part of the game that they say, "Yes, I'm fine. Everything is fine. I'm well looked after." And I remember a prisoner being there, telling me the truth, and he told me about that things were not all right, that he was beaten, and that there were difficulties, and I could see the prison official standing next to him, his face darkening, and I remember I was sitting there hoping that this conversation would be over as quickly as possible, because I didn't want to imagine what would happen with him after I left the room. So in this job, we are often put in situations where we try to help and where we can't help. Another example is that, as I said, in Syria, people would quite often disappear into prisons of the Secret Service, and we as diplomats, we were of course protected, but the people we were working with, they lived in constant danger, and quite often people wouldn't turn up for appointments, people we were working with. And then we found out afterwards that partners we knew and we relied on, would just disappear and get jailed. So, but still, it is rewarding in this job that at times you can help, you can make a difference. So there are frustrating moments, but it's still a great work to do.
Yeah, I think that's a point that's often forgotten. When we're promoting democracy around the world, the people that we're working with are putting a huge amount on the line. That they are really literally putting their lives on the line to make their country better. So those people that are fighting for liberty and freedom around the world they're really on the front lines, and we're helping them because that's what they want in their country, but they really are in dangerous situations. And I don't think we ever can forget that as diplomats and people who are lucky enough to be born in Germany or the United States. We have a question which I think you all have kind of gotten at, but what traits, we have someone that's studying American studies, and he has asked, what traits does a diplomat need to have? What traits are important for the job of a diplomat? Let's start with Carl.
I don't, as I don't think there's one solid formula for what would work as a diplomat. And I think that's part of what makes this job, frankly, special. Again, I'm not going to try to oversell it to you. There are drawbacks to this job, and I'm sure we'll get into them later. But there usually is no one right answer. There's usually no one right person that fits this job. But I think in general, you can say that you need to be someone that is flexible, that can adapt to an evolving situation around you, and willing to kind of think outside the box. Because I think there's again, the solutions are not always easy, they're not always evident, and so being able to think outside the box, being flexible, and not only in terms of the situation that you're in, but also the people that you talk to, and being open to different opinions and different being open to critical opinions about your own country, about what you come into with preconceived notions about what you think basically the world should be like. You should be open to criticism about that. And I think it's Peter can talk more about this, but it's tough for families as well. I'm recently married, so Germany is not a difficult place to be with family. It's a lovely place to be with family. So I've yet to experience perhaps what Peter has with his family in tougher places. But your family has to have your family has to support you, and you have to support your family as well, because it's not easy. And I think just kind of like one of the last things, and we talk about this constantly. It's kind of turned into a bureaucratic turn of phrase in the Department of State, but good judgment. Because a lot of the time you're out on your own, in a Syrian prison, in an Armenian prison, and you have to make the right decision, really, when there's not a boss or any, an adult nearby, and you have to make some calls on your own, and you got to make sure that your judgment is sound.
And Peter?
Yeah, thanks, Carl. What can I add? If I had to pick out one central trait, I think it would be curiosity. We switch posts every 2 to 3 years, and they can be very different. I mean, when I even at the ministry itself, I worked in areas different as nuclear disarmament, transatlantic relations, or German public law. So you have to every 2 to 3 years you get a new job. You have to work yourself into a new topic. You have to be ready to learn a completely new technical background. But also when you go abroad, you have to not just it's not just the job that is new, but it's also the surrounding. You have to build up a new network. You and of course your family, and you need to have a motivation to do that. Not only the first time, but also the second, the third, the fourth time when you go abroad. And I think the key motivation that keeps you going is curiosity to get into new topics and to meet more people, to deal with new challenges in a new environment. You rightly mentioned family and partnership. I mean, having the right partner is also very, very important. When you move regularly, then if you want to have a family life, your partner and your family has to follow, which means in the end they follow your needs and your career, which is tough. For the kids, moving is difficult, I think, wherever you go. Damascus is quite a pleasant place for a family. Nice climate, lovely people, very warm, very warmly welcoming people. So that was, I think, for us as a family with young kids, from a family point of view, it was a great posting. But no matter where you go, a new place means, for the kids, it means new schools, finding new friends. And of course, it is also an opportunity for children to get to know different backgrounds, to learn new languages. But explaining to a child that you have to move next summer and you need to find new friends, that's hard, and you shouldn't try to convince a teenager, citing the opportunities that new countries and a wider horizon might bring to them. It doesn't help them. So when you do that job, I think the most important thing is you have to be aware of that. You have to think and make decisions, not only for you, but you have to be aware that that in most places it's your partner and your kids who have to do at least as much adaptation work as you have to do yourself. But if you manage that, it can be a great experience for the whole family.
So we have a really insightful question from one of our attendees that I think is a compliment to how nuanced this person is in their knowledge of democracies around the world. And the question is, the way democracies are implemented or created around the world are different from country to country. And how do you deal with these differences as a diplomat? Like, a US democracy is not the model democracy that other countries use. The German system is not what other countries use. So how do you adjust, and what are some similarities and differences between democracies around the world that you all have worked in? Go ahead, Peter.
Well, first of all, we as diplomats, we have to work with the governments that are in place. So we have to start on the basis that we respect the local version of statehood or the local version of democracy, and as that sets the framework we work in. Yeah, I mean, in Syria, it was not about different shades of democracy. It was about a brutal dictatorship. So that's probably not a good example. The other place I've been to was Ireland, which is of course a democracy, but of course they do have different. They're a little different in their setup, and there it can be enriching for us to see how democracy works in other countries. So in Ireland, for example, I learned that in a smaller country, personal relations, of course, get much more important in a society where everybody knows everybody, or at least knows somebody who knows someone. That does have an impact on democratic decision making. And it's normal that democratic systems vary in different places, and it's important to treat those differences with respect, and see what we can learn from them. However, respecting respecting the local democratic system does not mean not to stand up for our own principles and our own ideas of freedom and democracy.
Go ahead, Carl.
Yeah, that's a good point, and you know, it's we can't expect that whatever works in Germany, whatever works in the United States is going to work everywhere. You know, we can't take what we have and use it as a template. We can use it as a foundation. We can use some of the principles as guiding principles and so forth. But you know, the exact formula is not going to work everywhere in the world, and I think that's pretty evident when we look around the world and we see, you know, when we see the trajectory of some of the countries that are in the democratic processes right now that are democratizing. And you know, I think there's a broad recognition of that, and I think that's one reason why the United States government, and I know that the German government does this as well, but we really rely on our partners on the ground to really work with, to really kind of to put these programs together, to craft these democratic programs or these development programs. You know, we contract out to local organizations a lot of the time, and local and people that have people on the ground outside of the embassy, outside of the walls of the embassy, of either be you know, one of the European embassies or the United States embassy. And I think they have a very good understanding and feeling for the local environment and what things will work on a local basis, which might, you know, be a little bit different than what we have, you know, in my case from the United States.
Great. And Peter, I have a particular question for you. And then Carl, you can answer this as well. It goes back to your question about assisting German citizens. And it says, when you're posted abroad and there's an incident with authorities and you have to go advocate for your citizens, does the local authority have to provide a native speaker for the diplomat? So does the authority have to speak to you in German, or how do you communicate with the local authority?
Well, the answer is no. They don't have to provide a speaker of your own language, which makes sense. I mean, if you think about an incident happening in Germany, if you have someone from a different country getting involved in a car accident in Germany, for example, and then he has to deal with authorities, we would expect everyone to accept that business here in Germany is conducted in German, and if people happen to speak English, that helps. That's good. But the idea is that if you are in a host country, the country deals with you in their own language, and we are the foreigners there, so we need to adapt. Yeah, I think that answers the question. Yeah.
Go ahead, Carl. If you have a particular experience or have anything to add to that question.
Yeah, sure. You know, I don't think there's any obligation for the local government to provide interpreters or to speak your language. It's actually kind of funny because I try to speak German here, and everybody answers me in English because they recognize right away that my German ain't so great. So I try to, but you know, usually in our embassies we will have a full-time interpreter on hire. And so when we go into negotiations or when we go into a more serious conversation with you know, that's so for example in Moscow, when we would go into the Ministry of Foreign Affairs or you know, at higher levels than myself, so you know, either our deputy chief of mission or you know, the head of our political section, to have a rather serious conversation with the Russians. And I know this applies more broadly to embassies outside of Moscow as well, but we have our own interpreters on hire to make sure that we are, you know, we would not rely on these kind of tense, serious conversations. We wouldn't rely on an interpreter provided by the host nation, because we want to make sure that the message and the language that we're getting is what is really being said, and that we are hearing the right message.
Great. Y'all are getting peppered with questions because there's a lot coming in, which is excellent because that shows how engaged and how interesting this topic is for our audience. The next question is, you know, have you ever had experience in a country where your interference or your, let's say, diplomatic nuances were not viewed very favorably, and the local audience or the local population was very reluctant and they felt that you were lecturing them? How did you handle such situations? Let's go to Carl first.
Yeah, that's an interesting question, and you know, I can go back easily to an experience in Moscow, because you know the conversations in Moscow were never really that easy, and there was plenty of nuance there. But I think that you know, if we look at sorry, what was the question? I just wanted to see the question again. Was that
So the question was, you know, have you ever gotten a question? Have you ever, was the local population or people you were dealing with viewed that your interventions were not, they did not want your interventions in their process? And how did they deal with that? How did you deal with them saying, listen, back off. You're the US, this is Russia. You don't know what it's like here. You don't know what you're doing here, type of thing.
Well, so at the end of the day, as Peter mentioned in his answer to a previous question, you know, we're there at the invitation of the local government. And so when we are working on programs that involve democracy, when we are involved in outreach to local communities and folks in the local country, we have to respect the laws of the local government. And so if we ever do something, we try our best not to get sideways with local customs or the local law or the local government. But you know, sometimes tense conversations are had. And of course, at the end of the day, we have to respect local law, even in places like Russia. And so, you know, when it comes down to organizations that have been, you know, declared foreign agents, or you know, the Russian government has expressed great displeasure at working with some of these organizations, we have to consider that. We have to stick to our principles as well, you know. And this is the challenge, you know. How does one democracy by nature is working with the people and understanding the will of the people. And if a government that you are there at the invitation of does not necessarily reflect the will of that people, the challenge of operating in that environment, and it takes nuance, and it's a challenge. So there's not a great answer to that, but I've kind of presented you with one of the challenges of this work.
Yep. And Peter?
I mean, in Syria, there was a big difference between the general reception by the official government. They were very skeptical of diplomats. They were a bit paranoid and were afraid that we were there spying. And by reception by the general people, who were very open, very warm, and where I didn't have the impression that there were situations where I was looked upon unfavorably. In official contexts, I mean, I remember, for example, that we showed a dance movie on the German dancer Pina Bausch, where I thought, okay, this can't be politically difficult in any way. But what I didn't do is at the end of the movie, there was a long list of institutions supporting that movie, and at the very end, there was an indication that movie was also supported by Israeli television, among many others, and that was considered by the Syrian authority as a direct attack. So sometimes it's difficult to. I mean, you try to be aware of where you are hitting sensitivities, but then there are occasions when you just don't get it right. And then, I mean, we got an official complaint, we apologized, and then that was it. Another example is the work we assisting our own nationals, which Carl also mentioned. It's a bit a typical trait of democratic system that we try to assist our own nationals abroad. Every country has the right to do that, but many countries don't use that right. So Syria would be a country where, when Syrians abroad are in trouble, the Syrian embassy wouldn't be of much help. They wouldn't try to assist. So they were suspicious when we were trying to look after our nationals, and they thought, okay, what are they doing here? If they are looking after that case, that guy must be particularly dangerous, maybe a spy as well. And then that would get those people, could get those people into even more difficulties than they were even in already. So that's an example where our actions were, no matter how often we tried to explain what we are doing and why we were doing that, there was a distrust that would remain, no matter how you try to explain.
So we're getting a lot of questions, and I would ask that the questions that people are asking, if they can focus on the work that American and German diplomats do to promote democracy in difficult environments. I think it'd be very productive to the conversation, and it would allow for more feedback from our panelists, as opposed to very, very, very specific political questions that I think would be very difficult for the panelists to answer in this session. So what I would ask Peter and Carl, in the absence of a few questions to answer, is, you brought this point up, Peter, that often there is an official government line that may not be the most productive between Germany and the host government, or Carl, for the US and the host government, but the people are really supportive of the United States or Germany. How do you negotiate that? And then on the reverse, have you ever worked in an environment where the government was very supportive of the relationship between the United States and it, but the people were not? I would draw from my experience from Saudi Arabia, where I think the government was much more supportive of the United States than the people were. But for you two, has there ever been an experience like that, or where the government, the people are supportive, but the government is not? If you'd like to explain a little bit about that. We'll start with you, Carl.
Sure, happy to. I keep drawing from my experience in Russia, but I think it's a very telling example, and it's actually quite relevant with everything going on as well. And I think in a lot of cases, what we have made clear, we as the United States government, is that when there are geopolitical tensions, when there are political tensions, it is between our governments. It is I can't think of, we very rarely, if ever, would take issue with the people of a country. And I think that in Russia, we've made clear, Secretary Blinken was here last week, and he gave a speech where he, specifically kind of reached out to the Russian people. And I think that's a very telling part of this job, is that, even in Russia, right after the illegal annexation of Crimea, there is still polling is tough in some of these climates. But in general, I never felt threatened by my interactions with ordinary Russian citizens. I have some very good friends that are Russian citizens. I have a lot of good friends that are Russian citizens, having grown up in that part of the world. And so and that is, again, one of the reasons this is the favorite part of my job. And Andy can talk about this because he works, I'm a little bit jealous because he gets to work, this is his day-to-day job is public outreach and working with folks. But that is a big part of this job, is public diplomacy and engaging with the people, in addition to the governments. And sometimes, as we've been talking about, you get different feedback and different, I guess, traction on the issue that you're talking about, depending on whether you're talking about the government or the people. And sometimes it can be a little tense. But in my career so far, I have not worked in a place where among the population, among ordinary citizens, there has been a very anti-United States sentiment, even in Russia. I hope that hasn't changed. I left there in 2016, and I don't think it has. But
I also should clarify my statement about Saudi Arabia was that I didn't think the people were against the United States. I think they were more skeptical of the United States than the government was. And just that we had to do a lot better job explaining our policy to the people than we did to the government. Go ahead, Peter, if you have an example.
I'm afraid not. I mean, I was privileged to be posted in Syria and in Ireland, where the general view of Germany and Germans was very positive. So I can only answer that question in a very general way. In autocratic systems, the government has a tendency to they want to control foreign relations, and that is one reason why diplomatic relations with democratic countries work so much easier and so much better. I mean, if you look at German-US relations, the diplomatic relations are only the tip of a very small iceberg. Sorry, of a very big iceberg. The relations are mainly from society to society, from people to people. You have businesses conducting business with each other. You have tourists traveling. You have families. All those are relations in open societies, and in a place where, like Syria, the government wanted to control contacts. They were, as I said, a bit paranoid, and that also marked, of course, the work we did there when we tried to interact with people.
So I'm going to lower the temperature on one of the questions that we received, and I'm going to say, I'm going to reframe it in this way. You both work for democratic governments. That means the governments change based on the outcomes of elections. How does the outcomes of elections, i.e. a change in party, both the US and Germany have gone through a recent election where the parties have changed, the parties that are governing have changed. How do you, as diplomats, how does your work change when the party changes in either the governing coalition here in Germany or in the White House in Washington, in the United States? So I'm going to start with Peter on this question because your election was more recent than ours.
Well, in Germany, foreign policy is on the outlines. The priorities of foreign policy are part of a broad consensus. I mean, our promotion of democracy and human rights, or priorities to work for peace and stability, strengthening the European Union, fighting climate change. I mean, all those are priorities that are not disputed among the parties. So changing governments can slightly change the order of priorities we have, but in general there isn't much change in German foreign policy, and that's, as I said, that's I think one reason why democracies are the more reliable allies, because the general interests stay the same, the general approach to foreign policy stays the same. So there is a lot of continuity, and that, of course, creates trust. Change of governments in other countries is, of course, a fact. I mean, change of governments in the US, of course, it affects. Same applies to the US. I mean, if there's a change of government over there, we have to adapt in some ways, but it doesn't change the profound joint interests that we have, and the profound understanding that we have for each other and on how we conduct foreign affairs.
So, and go ahead, Carl.
Yeah, sure. I was just going to say that the transition of power in a democratic society is actually it in and of itself is one of the foundations of that democratic process in our democratic processes, and it's one of the main strengths of democracy, really. And I think that is evident when, usually in the embassy we'll have an election, outside of COVID restrictions and in COVID times, we'll have an election. I'm not sure what we call it anymore. An election viewing party, Andy, is that what we call it? Or we'll invite people from the host nation government, people that the embassy know, into the embassy to actually watch the election take place as we're watching it. So we American diplomats who have no idea what the outcome is going to be are here, together with representatives of the host nation government, watching the same coverage, watching the election results come in. And I think that sends kind of a powerful signal, that we're ready to stand by and support our respective governments. For Peter, the German government; for me, the United States government, regardless of the political leadership and which party is in power. And as Peter mentioned, the day-to-day work of our job, for me anyways, at my level, does not necessarily change. In terms of what we are here to do, the messaging might change, and our interaction in terms of, I don't think it's any secret that under a previous administration there might have been a little bit more tension with our bilateral relationship, and so that is might be different from this administration, from the one before that. But the actual day-to-day work and the process of diplomacy is not fundamentally changed, I would say.
Great, and I know I can speak for Carl for this, and I think Peter, I want to understand the German Foreign Service the same way, that we are bureaucrats. We represent the government that is elected by the people of our country. And that's our job. And so that's what we really do. And that's the strength of our system, is that we are apolitical. And so that if the people vote for the person, that election is free and fair, we represent that elected official. And that's our job. And that's the dignity of the position is in that role. And so we're gonna take a step back a little bit from the political side of things. And we have a question that asks, what does your average day look like? Let's not do it from every job, but let's do it from where you are right now. Peter, the job that you're in right now at the Auswärtiges Amt, and Carl, your job at the embassy. In 2 or 3 minutes, what does your average day look like, if there is such a thing?
Well, the Foreign Office is a ministry, and a ministry is a bureaucracy. So it's fun, but it's not exciting all the time. With COVID restrictions, there is an important part missing. We don't meet people as often and as many people as we would usually do. So working right now looks quite different. As a ministry, our main job is to make sure that our superiors get the information they need to make decisions, and so most of the time we analyze the information we get from abroad. So in my case, that's information on the US, and we work that into pieces of paper that help our leadership to make decisions. In a big administration like ours, the challenge is to get the input and the ideas from all the different people together. So a lot of work goes into, for example, if I write a piece of paper on a certain US related topic, I would send it around to other people to give their opinion, give their input. And that is, I think, what creates the most work in my job right now. In the end, the main output we do is we prepare talks by our leadership, talking points. We analyze the results, and then adopt our picture. So it's that doesn't sound very glamorous, and it isn't. But it's still, even if you're just a small, if you just add a small piece into the big jigsaw of foreign relations, it's still great that you can be part of it, and your little piece can make a difference.
Great. And now, Carl?
Sure. So my job in the political section right now is really focused on what's going on with Russia and Ukraine right now. And there's a lot of very high level diplomacy that's taking place between the United States and Germany. Almost on a daily basis, really. Washington and Berlin talking to each other on the phone. The secretary was just out here. President Biden spoke with Chancellor Scholz together with a lot of other European leaders a few days ago. And so there's a lot of high level dialogue that's going on. And so our role in the embassy in the political section is kind of feed into that process. So there's a lot of issues that the United States and Germany are working together on, and so we will go over and talk to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. We will go and talk to some experts, in a lot of the numerous really think tank and academic organizations that are here in Berlin, but also across Germany, to kind of feed back into that process and say, well, here's what Germany is thinking on this. Here's Germany's position on this. Every time that there's one of these conversations, there's a lot of what we would call, do-outs that come out, which is basically, so-and-so wants to know what type of, what is the German stance on this? Or in return, the German Ministry of Foreign Affairs will say, well, your deputy secretary said this. Can you give us a little bit more information on that? And so really right now, that's what a lot of my work is focused on, is feeding into this dialogue that's going on. And I think I'm a very small piece of this puzzle, very small piece of it. But at the end of the day, it's a bigger. The bigger picture is transatlantic unity and how closely the United States is working with Europe and partners and allies on the ongoing geopolitical tensions right now. Not just on this issue, but a whole host of issues as well. And so it is rewarding, as Peter mentioned. There's a lot of bureaucratic work for the sake of work and forms to be filled out and all that kind of good stuff. But past that, and I find it a privilege really to be able to work this closely with the German government. It's been absolutely fantastic.
So I'm going to preface this next question with I know for the United States, and I believe I'm correct for Germany, that there is no official religion and there is an official separation between the government and religious institutions. So that's how I'm going to preface this question, because the question is there a role for religion to play when advancing democracy around the world? So I am going to, Carl seemed to have a very interesting reaction the first second, and Peter was a little bit more contemplative. So I'm going to go to Carl first and then give Peter a second to ruminate over his answer. Go ahead, Carl.
So as you mentioned, Andy, the United States doesn't have an official religion, and in our diplomacy, we don't advocate on behalf of one religion. What we really advocate for is religious freedom, in fact, I think every country in the world, barring a few where we don't have a presence, and even there, I think we might do this. But we release an annual international religious freedom report, which is basically kind of scoring each individual country on how free and fair the environment is for religion. And so that is really what the United States is focused on in terms of how this factors in. And that is a piece of this whole civil society, democracy, transparency, package, if you want to call it that we promote overseas, together with countries like Germany, where we are focused on international freedom, where people have the freedom to practice the religion that they believe on without being persecuted.
Great. And now over to Peter.
Thanks. Interesting question. In Europe, we have a very secular society, so we tend to underestimate how in most places in the world religion remains an important factor to shaping the way people think. So that's why in our diplomatic relations, churches and religious communities are part of the civil society and are part of our regular contacts. So I remember when I was in Damascus and we had visitors, we would of course also arrange meetings with the Mufti, who is the head of the head of Muslims in Syria and other religious institutions. I do also remember that when we, for example, had problems in child abduction cases where we were trying to get mixed Syrian and German couples to agree on what to do with, or to make sure that the children can travel freely. We used the help of religious leaders helping us to solve differences there. So, but it's not. It's the same as in the United States. I mean, we don't promote a certain religion, but we have to be aware on the, especially in the host countries, that religious leaders and religious communities play a very important role. On a personal basis, I mean, it's when you are new in a new country, you have to build up a social network, and you always try to get in contact with people, and make new friends. Also, maybe outside the diplomatic community. And there, of course, from a practical point of view, when you are new to a place and you want to make contacts, being part of a religious community, of course helps.
And I would also add, this goes back to the diversity question that we asked first, is that the more diverse our diplomatic corps are, the more representative we are, and maybe perhaps the better engagements we can have in countries where religion plays a much stronger role, when some of our diplomats can build that bridge between the United States by maybe using religion as a common ground and a common conversation starter. That I think would be a very interesting conversation for another interesting topic for another conversation for DAZ Stuttgart to organize. But I do want to ask, there was one question here about, will people have the opportunity to re-listen to this conversation, because there's a lot of non-native speakers out there and they want to re-listen to some aspects to learn new words and new vocabulary? And the answer is yes. The DAZ Stuttgart is recording this, and it'll be available on their social media and their website, so that you can rewatch it if you're looking at some of these answers for a project, or just to rewatch it again to learn some new vocabulary words. That it will be available to you. And so we have one more question. It actually kind of, let me see if there was one last question that I had. No, that was already taken. So let's go down this one, and we can start down this path, which is, a person asked, I'm studying American studies, and so I'm assuming this is someone that's German. Am I on the wrong track to become a German diplomat? So this is going to be our final question for Peter and Carl. So let's ask it now. Peter, if you could explain what is the right track to become a German diplomat, and how someone that's studying now can get on that track. And then Carl, I'll pass the question over for you if there's any Americans in the audience. Go ahead, Peter. I think the majority of people are going to be interested in your track of going into the German foreign policy track. So you get first dibs.
Thanks, Andy. Well, being interested and following conversations like this one here is certainly a very good step. So you are on the right track if you are here listening and participating in this discussion. To apply to the German diplomatic service, you need to have German nationality. You need to have also German nationality. It doesn't really matter if you have a different nationality as well. You need to have a good knowledge of English and French. You could also replace French in the entrance examinations with another UN working language, Chinese, Russian, Arabic, or Spanish. If you want to enter the senior service, what we call the Hörerdienst, you would need to have finished university studies. You need to have a degree. But, and that comes back to the question, it doesn't really matter what it is. There were times when in German public administration, you are convinced that lawyers are the best people to get a German administration going. Those times are long past. I remember when I started at the German Foreign Office, most colleagues, I think, studied economic sciences, Volkswirtschaft and Betriebswirtschaft. We had some people studying languages. Knowing exotic languages, of course, is a very helpful thing if you want to apply. But we also had philosophers, we had theologians, we had so there are people from all different backgrounds, and that is good, that is great, because the work we do is so different from job to job that it's important to have people from all different backgrounds working together.
Great, Carl, over to you.
Sure, yeah. So there, as Peter mentioned, there's not really a specific, there is no requirement that you shall have studied this. In fact, in the Department of State, and I don't think this has changed since I took the exam, there is no formal education requirement beyond high school. Having said that, it's a competitive career, and so most folks that do end up getting the offer will have completed, either a bachelor's degree or a master's degree. But there is not actually a formal education requirement beyond high school, which I think it's positive because it kind of talks, it links into what we've been talking about in terms of diversity and making sure that our outreach is as broad as possible, reaching back into society and across different spectrums of society. Again, having said that, background in international affairs or an international background is always helpful. But again, there's not a formal requirement. My father was in the Foreign Service, so I kind of grew up a little bit in the Foreign Service. But actually, I did not want to join the Department of State. I was going to do engineering. It turns out I wasn't very good at math, so I went into international relations, and I just happened to kind of come into this job. But it wasn't, you don't have to decide, at age 17, I'm going to join the Department of State in order to join the Department of State. There are a lot of people that join as a first, as a second, as a third, as a fourth career, and so there's a whole process, and you do have to be an American citizen. You do have to pass security clearances, and all that process. You have to take a written exam, and then you have to submit some writing, and then you have to go through what we call an oral assessment, which is basically an interview process that you do in Washington, D.C. So it's a long process, and I won't go into that because all of that is online and it's pretty straightforward. But in terms of an actual formal requirement, we really do maximize, and I think particularly now. We really do try to maximize the breadth of people that we open up to the Department of State. Having said that, I think we can do a better job on recruitment. There's not, speaking to folks in the United States, not a lot of people also know what U.S. diplomats do and what the State Department does. And so I think we need to kind of double down on our advertising, on our outreach. And I think, again, as part of this whole diversity, part of our efforts in diversity. But I don't know, Andy, did you have anything to add to that from your experience?
I think it's great. Both of y'all made some really good points about that. Both systems are really open for a broad spectrum of people and Studienrichtungen to come in and become diplomats and represent their countries as they would like. And that the call to action, we want people to apply for both of our diplomatic corps because we think that our strength is in the people and how we represent that abroad. And so for maybe people that don't know if they want to join the diplomatic services of their country, internships can be a great way to get introduced to what people do in firsthand. Carl, do you want to start off and talk about internships for the State Department, focusing maybe on Germans that would like to do an internship with us? And then Peter, I'll ask you to do the same thing. Go ahead, Carl.
Good point. Thanks for reminding me about that, Andy. That's actually a fantastic point. So we have internships, obviously, for American citizens as well and American students, but also we look to have interns, local German interns, or doesn't have to be a German national, but interns from the local government that work in our embassy. These are usually students, and there are different sections in our embassy. We have the economic section, we have the political section, and we have a number of different sections. And I think that we all use. And I think Marian just posted the website there. And so you can look at these. And Andy, we have internships in consulates as well, correct? And
yep.
So, and we have consulates in Frankfurt and in Hamburg and in Munich, and as well as our embassy in Berlin. And so, not just in Germany, this is a worldwide project as well, where we host, where we look to have local interns work in our embassy. And I think that's a pretty good. Kind of lead-in, as particularly in the student years. And if you're thinking about diplomacy, I think it's valuable. I know our section, for one, we tend to give our interns a lot of good work. So, I think it'd be a rewarding. Thing to try out.
And now, Peter.
Yeah, talking about websites, I think we also have a website from the German Foreign Office.
There it goes. Marian's already shared it. Yep.
Good. Great. Thanks, Marion. And I could also maybe add a bit on the process, which Carl just did, which I forgot to enter our diplomatic service. First step is the online application, which you will find at the website indicated. Then there will be an online pre-assessment of your application. The next step is a written test. That would mean you would have to write an essay on a political topic. Your English and French skills are tested, or in a different language, a different UN working language. But there will also be questions on law, economics, politics, history, and general knowledge. And there is a test of intellectual and logic skills. You will find some example questions on the website. And I remember when I looked at those questions, when I was thinking about applying, I looked at the questions and then I thought, okay, well, you don't need to bother. You will find out that when you apply for jobs, most employers and institutions will stress that they only take the best people, and that it's really difficult to enter. And that applies to us as well, of course. If you look at those questions, those are questions also regarding topics which you have not studied. And that is the same for everybody else answering those questions. You are used to being asked questions about topics you studied, so you are expected to be able to answer most of those. And if you can't, you know that you're in trouble. This is a different type of examination. So you can repeat the written exam as often as you wish. So you could just go give it a try. And of course, you need a bit of luck as well. So that's another reason to just go have a try and see how it works. It's also a good training for other application procedures that you might want to go through later. If the written exam works, then you are invited to an oral test. That includes talking to a psychologist. That sounds scary now. No, talking to I remember was talking to a lady, with a very friendly lady, trying to find out about your motivation and your background, who happens to be a psychologist. You have to work with colleagues in a group exercise, and you have to give a short presentation. Yeah, that's the way to become a diplomat. If you want to try out and apply for an internship, you will also find information on that on the internet. Yes, and the link was just posted. Internships have to be part of your university studies. It has to be a Pflichtpraktikum We need to do that to make sure that those who need it really get access. You can do those internships either at the Foreign Office in Berlin, or you can go abroad. I would recommend going abroad, because that's from my point of view, that's the more authentic and special foreign office work. There are, however, COVID restrictions. So there are limits to the program. So you need to find out whether things work at the place you want to go, at the time you want to go. But yeah, an internship, I think, is a great way for yourself to decide, is that a career that I could imagine living in? But it's also, of course, a good reference if you want to apply to become a diplomat later on.
Yep.
I could actually just real quick just second that. I actually knew German interns that were interning in the German embassy in Washington, and they loved it.
And so I just want to mention for the U.S. mission here in Germany, that the address that Marianne shared in the chat, that is for anyone that is studying in Germany and has a Studiumpflicht that they have to do an internship. So you have to be registered in a German Institute of Higher Education in order to use that link. If you're an American citizen and you would like to do an internship, you have to go to careers.state.gov to apply. And I will type that into the chat if there happens to be an American citizen listening in, because you would have to apply via this link as an American citizen. But other than that, thank you to Peter and Carl for all of your insight. It has been incredibly enriching for me to hear what two great colleagues are doing. And I do look at German diplomats as colleagues, especially in the field, because we often work together on a number of things. So thank you, Peter and Carl. And also thank you to the students and the participants. Great questions. And if you have more questions about this and the US-German relationship and the US-EU relationship, stay tuned in with DAZ Stuttgart because they do a lot of programs on this exact topic, as well as the German-American Institutes, all 12 of them, all around Germany. So if you're not in Stuttgart, there's probably another DAZ or another similar institution very close to you. And I'll hand it back over to Marianne to close us out.
Thanks. Yeah, thank you, Andy. Thank you, panel, for taking the time. I think this was a very interesting and insightful conversation, and you might get a lot of applications for internships after that, which is great. We can end right on time. That's also fantastic. And as Andy said, if you're interested, please follow us on social media. Check out our website. We have the North America Film Festival coming up next week, which is taking place virtually this year. So you can find more information about that. Otherwise, thank you all so much and have a great weekend. Bye.